Most of us want our children to grow up happy, to make long life friends and to experience a perfect life. Sadly, some kids don't get that chance. Some die accidentally, some die due to cancer or other medical issues, and some are unfortunately murdered. The case we are talking about happened in a small town in Victoria, Australia. I'm Kurt, and today we are talking about Jaidyn Raymond Leskie. Jaden was 14 months old when he was murdered, and as of 2019, his case is still a mystery. Let's begin. Jaidyn Raymond Leskie was born on the 30th of April 1996. Before we talk about Jaden's murder, I'll give you some backstory on the date of his disappearance. On the 15th of June 1997, Jaden's mother, named Belinda, was planning to go out with her sister for the night. Before leaving, Belinda's boyfriend Greg comes up to them and asks to babysit Jaden, which was unusual since Greg would normally call. Belinda says it's fine and dresses Jaden up. He was last seen wearing a green long-sleeve shirt, a red jacket and grey track pants. Belinda also packed some diapers, warm clothes and other small baby items in a bag. Greg tells Belinda that he will drop Jaden off back at her house after a couple hours. Belinda then buckles Jaden into Greg's car and kisses him goodbye, not knowing this would be the last time she would see her son alive. Greg takes Jaden to his house. In the afternoon, Greg claims that the two were just watching TV and playing games. Late in the afternoon, a neighbour reported hearing a scream. The neighbour also claimed seeing Greg hosing his driveway in the rain. Friends of Greg tried calling him later on, but there was no response, and when they stopped by, Greg's car was not in the driveway. Later on, Greg got into communication with the babysitter which was watching Belinda's daughter. The babysitter told him that Belinda had left with her sister for the night. A while later, Belinda tried calling Greg's phone up to 30 times between 5:30 and 7:45, but like Greg's friends, no one answered the phone. Belinda assured herself that Jaden was fine and continued to have a fun night. Despite the phone ringing constantly, Greg claims he was home the whole time watching movies and playing video games with Jaden. Around 10 p.m, Greg called a neighbour asking if she had any spare diapers, telling her that he was running out. The neighbour tells him that she doesn't have any, but she offers to send her husband over to show Greg how to make one out of a towel. He declines, and the neighbour says she hears a dog and a baby playing in the background. At the party, Belinda calls for an update. Greg finally answers his phone and explains that Jaden had fallen back on a radiator and burnt his bottom. He claims that he had taken Greg to a hospital where they had applied cream. Jaden still seemed uncomfortable, so Greg took him to another hospital where the doctors decided to keep him overnight to make sure the cream was working. Belinda is upset about this news and tells Greg she wants to leave and check up on Jaden at the hospital. Greg assures Belinda that Jaden is happy and safe and he's being treated. This calms Belinda down. At 2 a.m, Belinda was drunk and called Greg for a ride home. When Greg arrived, Jaden wasn't in the car. Belinda kept asking where her son was, and that's when Greg said again that Jaden was at a hospital. While driving, Greg pointed at a hospital which was under construction and said that's where Jaden is. Since Belinda was really drunk, she didn't question it anymore. When the two arrived back at Greg's home, they discovered the front windows had been smashed and there was broken glass everywhere. Belinda blames one of Greg's ex-girlfriends and lies down. Nothing was stolen, but Greg starts searching the house frantically for reasons unknown. After 10 minutes, Greg tells Belinda that it would be better to sleep at her house. Belinda suggested reporting the damages to the police, but Greg refused. As the pair are leaving, they discovered a severed pig's head in the gravel pit. Both of them say they didn't see it at first, but they may have been distracted or too drunk. When the pair get back to Belinda's house, Greg says he wants to find out who damaged his property and he leaves. Belinda walks into her house, calls the babysitter for an update on her daughter, and then passes out on the lounge. After leaving Belinda's house, Greg was pulled over by the police. Greg did nothing wrong, it was just that it was quiet and not many people drove around at 3 AM. Police knew Greg, and when they saw him, they expected to hear a cocky and disrespectful person. Instead, he was quiet and compliant, which was unusual. What's weird is that Greg didn't tell the police about the damage to his house and the pig's head. At 5 AM, Belinda was slapped awake by Greg. Greg admitted that Jaden isn't in the hospital and that he had lied, and that Jaden was actually missing. He tells Belinda that he left the toddler alone for 5 minutes and he's unsure where he is. After being told, Belinda rushes off with Greg to the police station to report Jaden missing. When the two arrived at the police station, the stories were off. The stories which were told kept changing, so the two were split up and interviewed differently. Police were dispatched to Greg's home, and in less than 12 hours, the homicide squad was called in. Not to find a body, just to give extra help. Police say it looked like Belinda was more concerned in getting more sleep than looking for her son. I think the reason for this is due to the alcohol in her system, the amount of sleep she had, which was only a couple of hours, and the pure shock. But since her story changed and her attitude was different from what police expected, Belinda was considered a suspect in Jaden's disappearance. Police also suspected that Greg was responsible for Jaden's disappearance. Since they had nothing to charge Greg with, they let him go but kept a strong eye on him. Police searched Greg's car but couldn't find anything. Greg later confessed to a close friend that he was concerned that he may get suspected of Jaden's disappearance, saying if they found weed, that could help police. He also said if they found, quote, my bloody jeans with Jaden's blood on it, end quote. When the friend asked why there was blood on his jeans, Greg told him it was due to Jaden getting an ulcer in his mouth which was bleeding, and to make sure the blood didn't go everywhere, he used his pants. For some reason, he told another friend that the blood was from a cut from Jaden's hand and not an ulcer. Even with the lack of evidence, searches increased but no one could find anything. At the time, it was the biggest search in Australian history. Police were confused with the pig's head and the smashed windows, but police knew the smashed windows were too small to climb into without getting cuts. There were no signs of dirt in the house either. When police searched for blood, they could only find dog blood, but when police looked in the bins, they found 5 bloody tissues in a plastic bag. The blood was a match to Jaden. The tissues were twisted at the ends, what you would expect if you wanted to put tissues in your ears or nose to prevent blood spilling. Police also found $600 in cash underneath Greg's bed. All the money was wet and it looked like Greg was drying it off. That's when police remembered when searching Greg's car they located his wallet and it was completely soaked in water. The wallet's business cards were all ruined, which means the wallet hadn't accidentally fallen into the sink, but the wallet would have had to be underwater for a period of time. It turned out that a couple of people who hated Greg smashed his windows and tried to scare him with a pig's head. Police confirmed that the people who did this never entered Greg's home and had no clue Jaden was there. They also told police while they were vandalising the house they never saw or heard a toddler. They told police if they thought someone was in the house they wouldn't have done it, which lines up with the evidence the police have. Police started looking in nearby rivers and lakes, thinking that Greg may have disposed Jaden's corpse. After being interviewed by police as an official suspect, Greg claims that Jaden did indeed receive a burn, but it wasn't serious, saying he didn't even cry from it. Greg says he put Jaden to bed and went to pick up Belinda. Greg stated that he lied to Belinda because he didn't want to freak her out. When the pair got to Greg's house, he felt uneasy. That's when he started searching for Jaden but couldn't find him. Greg didn't tell Belinda about her missing son because he didn't want to worry her, and he thought he could find Jaden on his own. When he took Belinda home and went back to his own place, he discovered the bag that Belinda packed was also missing. Greg thought it may have been a friend who took Jaden, but at the end he couldn't find him. He said he never heard the phone ring, which would have rang over 30 times, and with the blood being found in the rubbish bin, Greg says one of his dogs gave Jaden a minor injury which caused him to bleed. As for the wet money and the wet wallet, Greg says he doesn't know why the money was wet, stating he got the money after he sold his boat. With the wet wallet, he said he was working with his car when it started raining heavily. After getting a lead about Greg and a place he visited often, they combed the area without success. Volunteers searched through dump sites, general waste bins, and through more forested area. Unfortunately, nothing turned up. On Thursday, 2 weeks after Jane went missing, Belinda's daughter was taken from her and given to her biological father. Child Protective Services believe that the daughter was at risk after what happened to Jaden. The same day, Greg's car was seized and taken to be examined more carefully. After this, companies started donating state-of-the-art gear to find Jaden. One company donated a $100,000 thermal imaging camera which could be attached to a helicopter. Even with all this new help, sadly Jaden still remained missing. 3 weeks after Jaden went missing, police officially announced that this was now a homicide investigation. It was considered very unlikely that Jaden would still be alive. A day after that announcement, a month after Jaden had last been seen, Greg was charged with Jaden's murder. At the time of Greg being charged, Jaden's body still hadn't been recovered. Greg refused to answer any questions, and his lawyers said that the only evidence the police had was circumstantial. Lawyers also said the case was weak. Greg requested bail, but it was denied. On the 1st of July, 1998, a 14-year-old teenager was at a picnic with his family at Blue Rock Dam. As any teenager would, he quickly got bored and started walking around. He was walking alongside the dam when he saw something in the river. At first he thought it was a pillow, but after having a closer look he realized it was the body of a dead toddler. After seeing the body, the teenager runs to his grandma, which isn't far behind. At first, the grandmother thinks that the teenager is joking, but after seeing the lifeless body for herself, she realizes it's no longer a joke. The grandma sends the teenager off to his parents so they can phone the police, while she stayed with the body. She said, quote, "I couldn't leave him alone any longer," end quote. The body had been badly decomposed, but luckily due to the freezing water, the body was in a better condition than most investigators believed. Search and rescue teams were sent to safely recover the body, giving the child the care he deserved. Because the body had been preserved in the freezing water, it was clear to police that this was the body of 14-month-old Jaidyn Raymond Leskie. The whole dam was a crime scene, and while police were searching, they found a sleeping bag in the middle of the dam, held down by a crowbar. In the sleeping bag they found grey track pants, a diaper and a couple other baby items. These items were the things Belinda packed for Jaden. Police realised that the killer put Jaden in the sleeping bag and held the body down with a crowbar. In the autopsy, it was learned that Jaden had a broken arm which was patched together with tape and cloth. The autopsy states there was no sign of the bone healing, which means Jaden died not long after his arm was broken. The autopsy also showed a cracked skull. At first, it was difficult to say how much damage this would have done to Jaden's brain due to level of decomposition, but after examining the cracked skull, it showed this much force would have given him a severe brain injury. It also showed that it wasn't accidental since it was a direct hit. The cause of death was most likely due to the skull fracture, but doctors couldn't say for certain if the injury happened before or after death. Greg's trial began not long after Jaden was found. The defense team planted a bunch of doubt in the jury's mind, saying there was people at Greg's house who did damages to his place, proving Greg wasn't the only person there, suggesting there was another killer which took Jaden from Greg's home and murdered him. Prosecutors told the jury that the only person who had a key to the house was Greg, and the broken windows were too small to crawl through. Sadly, most of the evidence the prosecutors had was circumstantial. But there was a lot of it. One of the biggest pieces of evidence was the crowbar found at the crime scene. Several witnesses claimed the crowbar belonged to Greg. The trial ended 8 weeks after it began. The jury was split. 4 days after discussion, the jury came back with its verdict. Greg was found not guilty of murder and not guilty of manslaughter. Greg was essentially a free man. Because there wasn't a lot of evidence, the case has been left unsolved. In 2006, an inquest was opened, with more evidence. One piece of evidence was two prisoners. Two prisoners claimed that Greg confessed to them, saying it was an accident. Luckily for police, if new evidence is found, Greg can be put back on trial for Jaden's death. Now that I've gone through the facts, I'm going to list 3 theories. Theory 1. Greg murdered Jaden. Most people believe this theory, that Jaden was murdered by Greg. Belinda has told media that her and Greg got together partially due to how much interest Greg was showing Jaden. Greg would actually teach Jaden how to help him while he was doing repairs on cars. They would also play games, watch TV, and do other things. From Belinda's point of view, Greg was a father figure to Jaden. Then, the news came out that Greg wasn't so innocent. Many of Greg's friends say he would torture animals. They informed police that Greg would put feral cats in plastic bags and set them on fire. Belinda also states that one time Greg put on a mask and broke into her home. Greg took Jaden from his crib and force-fed him until he vomited. This hasn't been confirmed and no charges were brought up. Lots of people noticed that Jaden was off. It wasn't due to feeding or sleeping. People think that Greg abused Jaden. Greg started babysitting Jaden for only a couple hours a day, but that turned into a couple of days. People noticed that Jaden wouldn't cry or eat when Greg was around, and he would just sleep the whole time. Jaden's whole attitude changed when Greg was brought into the picture. Lots of people think that on the night Jaden disappeared, Greg drove to the dam and murdered Jaden. Greg walked into the water to put Jaden's corpse in it, and using the crowbar to make sure the 1-year-old wouldn't move. People point out to the wet money and wallet, thinking that Greg must have dropped it while he was dumping Jaden's corpse. People also point out Greg hosing his driveway while it was raining, saying Greg was washing away Jaden's blood. But as of right now, the court has shown Greg as not guilty, but many questions are still around. Theory 2. Jaden's death was an accident. Some people think that Greg was the one who dumped Jaden's body, but that he didn't murder him. The theory goes like this. On the afternoon Jaden disappeared, Greg was teaching Jaden how to fix a car, like he normally did. But at one point, the car came down and accidentally killed Jaden, crushing his head. This lines up with the autopsy reports with the fatal injury to his head. Greg screams in response to Jaden's death and a neighbour hears that. After putting Jaden's body in a sleeping bag, Greg hoses his driveway in the rain to get rid of the blood. Greg puts the 1-year-old's body in the car and drives it to the dam where Jaden will be discovered a few months later. While dumping Jaden's body, Greg's wallet falls out into the water and gets wet. While Greg is dumping Jaden's body, Belinda and Greg's friends are trying to get a hold of him. No one answers the calls. Friends of Greg's drive past his house, but his car's not in the driveway. Later on, Greg returns home and puts the blood-soaked tissues in the bin and tries to dry his money underneath his bed. With Greg's previous history, people speculate that Greg thought he would get convicted of the murder, and that's why he's remained silent. This doesn't explain why Greg didn't report the damages to his house and straight up lied to Belinda, but who knows, we may be missing a piece to the puzzle. Theory 3. A random murder. This theory won't involve Greg. Some theories state that Greg is innocent and a stranger took Jaden and murdered him for no reason. Not a lot of evidence suggests this, since there was no way someone could get into Greg's house. The smashed windows were too small to get in and the only person who had the key to the place was Greg. But let's say a stranger was still able to take Jaden, why would he or she kill Jaden? The killer wouldn't gain anything from it, and not only that, there's no motive. All I'll say is I think Greg did this, but I want to hear your thoughts. Please tell me in the comments below. I hope you liked today's video. If you have any thoughts or suggestions about this case or how I make my videos, please tell me in the comments. Links to all my social media and sources are in the description. Consider subscribing and pushing the notification bell so you know when a new video is out. Also, if you've got a moment, please share this video. The more people who see these videos, the higher a chance the case may get solved. With all of that being said, hopefully one day, Jaden Leskie's case will get solved. Good night.